And then he pulled some earplugs out of his pocket, put them in his ears. And I asked him if he was going to wear those for first period and, block the teacher out.
I remember putting the earplugs in. I heard in my head that I had better do it because, time was running out. And I kept hearing these different things in my head. And now's the time, do it now. And finally, I pulled the gun out and I put the earplugs in my ears. I'm not sure which order it was. And I remember holding the gun out in front of me.
And I said, that's my dad's gun.
The neighbor who the guns were stolen from, it was my friend at the time, Toby Nace, his father. They went out and shot guns a lot.
You break in the house?
They're in this garage they have, locked up in this gun cage. And I knew where he kept the keys.
In the back of my mind, somewhere, I'm sure I knew where the key to the gun safe was, but I heard in my head where the key to the gun safe was. I really wasn't doing much thinking of my own. I was more just scared, and I hate to say listening to what I was hearing in my head, but that's pretty much what it was.
I think the mental instability is a huge factor, but we have to understand why it unfolds the way it does in this particular form, because there are, sadly, many people who suffer from grave mental disorders that don't ever shoot anyone. So the question is why this intersection of someone with a mental disorder that ends up in a shooting, and it's the confluence of the social setting and the individual's problems that produces this pattern. But I do think it's relevant. Completely normal people don't shoot people. It is an intersection of a mental disorder which in the young shooters is in its very early stages, where there's tremendous shame and sensitivity among the shooters about how marginal they are, how disturbed they're becoming.
The plan was in my head, but it was in a part of my head that wasn't connected with what I was... It wasn't in my conscious mind, because everything that I was doing, don't want to say I was like a robot listening to, but I mean, it was an odd thing because I heard in my head to do something and I did it.
I just know he wasn't himself that day, last time I talked to him.
I called them foreign thoughts for a long time. They were just thoughts in my head that just were there. I thought, well, I wouldn't think that. Somebody must have put that in my head.
I never saw any signs to me that I would have ever thought that he was mentally ill whatsoever.
I'm quite persuaded that he is severely disturbed, as are most of the shooters, but I can understand entirely why the victims don't think so. We don't know how to identify schizophrenics very easily at the age of 12 or 13 years old. Our diagnostic categories are set up for people in their 20s, and by the time they're in their 20s, these symptoms become quite florid.
Well, see, like at the lunch table, we talk about stuff, and I don't know, I guess we started talking about bringing a gun to school or something and taking over. And I guess...
Okay, you said we. Who's we?
Like me and Toby Nace.
What I remember is that there was discussion among Michael Carneal and some of his friends of taking over the school. There were discussions that would be a neat thing to do, at least among some of Michael Carneal's friends.
We watched a movie called The Basketball Diaries, and in one scene he pulled a gun out of his trench coat and shot kids. And he said, man, I'd like to do that to some of them kids that pick on me. And I just snickered. I didn't want to reprimand him for saying that. He didn't be getting an argument or anything. So like I said, I'm just let things roll off my back, and that was the end of that. We're just two kids sitting on the couch.
Films by themselves don't make people kill anybody, but films and books help to define what's seen as positive and alluring, in this case, a kind of anti-hero image. It's important to understand that the school shooters are not shooting off at random. They're not exploding without warning. They are planful. They have intended to do what they're doing. And what is their goal? Their goal is to change the way other people around them see them. It's to change their public image.
Toby was the only one that you really talked to about taking guns to school.
Yeah.
Did he know it was this day? Did anybody know it was this day?
No.
Police today are focusing on who else might have been involved in planning Monday's bloodbath.
Why was there 5 guns there? Why were people making the statements that something big was going to happen at the school? Why were certain kids told not to be in that area?
There might have been other kids that had talked about, yeah, that'd be fun to shoot the school up. That might have happened. But I don't think that there were any other kids that had made an emotional commitment to do it.
There was never sufficient evidence, never nearly sufficient evidence to charge anyone other than Michael Carneal.
We are in a society over here where houses are sometimes quarter mile to a mile apart. So if someone gets in trouble, we have to take care of ourselves. If I call for police, sometimes it's 30, 45 minutes before they can even respond to anything. So yes, we do have guns here. But we also teach, or we should be teaching, that when you fire a gun at somebody, it's permanent. And I don't believe with Michael Carneal he was ever taught that it was permanent. That's a failure of our society in the sense that maybe his neighbors didn't tell him, and maybe his father and his mother did not tell him.
I felt distant from my parents, but my home life, it was as perfect as I can possibly conceive a family being. It was just my dad, he worked 5 days a week, 8 hours a day, probably if that. My mom, she was a stay-at-home mom. It was just me and my sister. She made good grades, and she was always doing good.
His sister was a senior and was in Jessica's class, and of course she was in the band too.
Naturally, kids that are in the band have a common interest in music. They participate together, they go to contests together, they march together. So kids in the band are going to be closer to each other.
I was pretty much stuck in it regardless of how much I didn't want to be in it, but that's where a lot of the people who I considered friends were.
Every high school in America has a mascot, and Heath happens to be a pirate. I remember one time after the shooting, a young man from Newsweek came down, and we were having a football game that day. And we had already planned that we were going to have camouflage day.
But turkey can see color. So the hunter orange, they wear a breakup pattern to break up the silhouette. But the guns, they completely camouflage their face, their gloves, even the firearm.
He wrote his article about the militaristic attitude of the school based on that one day of us using camouflage clothing as a way of having spirit for the football game. It is a reality that we all have mascots, and all of the mascots have some sense of violence attached to them if you want to look deep enough. Rebels are a very common mascot, and one guy's patriot is another guy's terrorist. I understand that, but that's not going to change the aspect that schools are still going to be rebels and patriots and pirates and tigers and dogs and eagles, wildcats, lions, and hawks.
In the younger shooters in middle schools and high schools, it intersects a pecking order among teenagers that produces terrible feelings of despair in many teenagers, in thousands of them. They don't shoot people, but they do go through a great deal of depression.
People at school would say things, why don't you dress nice like your sister, and why don't you do this like your sister? So I had these strange feelings of just kind of alienation and left out. She was all-state in band and all-state in choir, and she was real popular, and she was a senior the year I was a freshman, so she was at the top of the food chain, you know, and I was at the very bottom.
The pecking order, the jockeying for social status, the desire to be accepted, the power of rejection among middle school children in particular is enormous, especially in American culture, but is well known around the world. And so when someone who is mentally unstable intersects this powerful pecking order